Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So yeah, my name is Geoff Revill. I am a businessman, but I used to be an engineer, so I kind of have 2 feet in 2 camps. I do understand the technology, I understand what it can do for me, but I also spent 10 years as a strategic marketing guy, so I've been responsible for building and selling products. I've been responsible for defining market opportunity and defining product strategy, and I've also been building stuff. In fact, way back when, I didn't know I was doing it, but I actually wrote a little bit of the internet itself in the UK. I actually did lower level protocols of X25 for BT's deployment. So it's the first digital interface to the internet. I didn't even know I was doing it. So with that, that's the sort of context. And I also spent some time with companies. I ended up in California, and I actually built a tool chain that Intel now sells as their Internet of Things tool chain. We had about 300 engineers working on that, so it was quite a big project. So I've got kind of a lot of different types of background, and I'm looking at this ecosystem here. What I'm looking at, when you look at markets, you've got to understand ecosystems. You've got to understand how ecosystems function, and you've got to understand how they interplay with each other. And I'm just one very small participant in an ecosystem, but I have a view on what I'm looking for. So CrowdThink, my startup, I'm not going to sell that to you, but basically it's a social platform that doesn't use any data or as minimal as possible. And everyone's pseudonymous in it, so essentially it's an environment where transactions can't happen. It's about engagement, not transactions. But I do want to be able to facilitate in future variants of my products and service, both the opportunity for the individual to have an identity that facilitates transactional opportunity, and to do that in a MyData ethical, contextual way. So I'm very much tracking what's going on in the MyData segment. And I've got a view on the way in which I'm seeing it develop from a businessman's point of view. And that's really what I want to take you through today. I need a clicker. Which one is it? Okay, right. So here's the MyData world as it's perceived in all the documents. And you have your MyData profile over here, you have the individual, and notice how these arrows were built, very much looking out this way. And so the general MyData approach has been very much a thought process as me as the individual at the centre, which I completely agree with. But if we want an ecosystem to develop, we also have to address this. Because I'm a business guy, and I'm at the centre of my world. As an ethical guy, I'm quite happy for you to be in control of your data, but I'm at the centre of my world. And what I want to do today is walk you through a little bit of that perspective, because I think actually we haven't spent enough time rebalancing the equation that's going to facilitate the ecosystem development for MyData from a business point of view. We've always been, most of the presentations I see are all about this. And it was last year, it was very much about this, and this year most of it's been about this, but not enough about these guys. We need to put that balance in if we're actually going to turn this MyData movement into a business opportunity. So again, this comes from the MyData document. Essentially it says, hey, here's the world today, and it's a mess. APIs all over the place, and everybody has to integrate with everybody, and God, isn't it awful? And here's the aggregator model where these horrible businesses are at the center of it, sucking in all my data and taking my control away from me. And down here, here's the future, where I'm at the center, and everybody's servicing my needs. Where actually, what I think we're currently building is the same thing up here. Right? We're doing the same thing over at the moment because we haven't done the right things, or haven't prioritized. We have talked about the right things, we haven't prioritized the right things to actually remove this mess and to facilitate this. And to do that, we need to put the business guy here, not as the enemy, but as part of the integral solution. So this section was meant to be about PIMs and PDSs, and they very much are one of the facilitators, primary facilitators of this movement, because the idea is that as soon as the individual's got the control of their data, everything gets solved. And last year, most of them were about, I saw presentations that a little bit about these PIMs and PDSs was about securing, control, management, giving the individual that power, all that kind of stuff. Interestingly, this year I'm seeing a shift, because they're beginning to realise to make money, they need to actually position slightly differently, which is good. And there's a movement, but I don't think it's complete yet. But they're moving to things where values can be delivered. So some of them are talking about building a safer internet. Well, okay, kind of nice, governmental maybe, want some of that, but it's still a little bit idealistic. A lot of them are jumping on the legislative compliance bandwagon. Great, that's fine. And what they're offering is a private by design service replacement, because most companies, individuals, we're a small community who actually understand what the hell privacy by design is. We actually understand what privacy is in a digital context. Most of the rest of the world really doesn't. They're struggling to understand the legislative constructions, and they very much struggle to understand this and what it really means in a business context. So businesses that can walk in and facilitate this by delivering this, that's good stuff. But actually I'm also seeing this a lot, where these guys are now also walking into these organisations and saying, culturally you're not ready for the shift that the legislation is requiring. You need to adjust, you can't do it fast enough. Engage with us, we'll provide you services that are wrapped around this PIM PDS concept because it's easy from an implementation standpoint to get your head around. And so they're sort of moving people, offering this cultural transition thing. So these are all good stuff. This is a shift. It's a way of nudging the market forward. But I don't think it's enough for the MyData ecosystem. I have to do change it. What's that?
Yeah, financially done.
Okay. So if we go back to the individual, and the whole PIM PDF model, on the left-hand side is the individual's point of view of the world. The internet is there to make my life easier. That's all I care about, really. I don't want to manage my data. I really don't want to manage my data. It's a waste of my time. The internet doesn't work that way today, and I don't want it to work that way tomorrow. So don't make me do stuff I don't want to do. And the way I deal with this world as it is today, because what I always think about is education is a very interesting thing. Most people don't spend time to learn how the internet works, but most of the people on the internet are beginning to understand how it works. It's kind of, time is a great educator. So they do things like they reluctantly share, or they abstain, or they obfuscate their information, and they put ad blockers in, and they do all sorts of little things that they think is what's needed to give them a degree of control in this world in which, frankly, they have very limited control. But I also look at consent, and frankly, it requires me to understand too much. I really don't understand this world. Right? So why do I want to go through this consent thing? Now, we're stuck with this one, by the way, because of the legislative context, so I'm not going to say that we're not going to have to solve this problem. We are going to have to make this problem a hell of a lot easier to deal with, and I've spoken at other presentations about that. My primary solution to that is data minimization. The less you have to ask consent for, the easier it is to understand. So I think it solves an awful lot of privacy by design and security by design issues. So that's them on the left. And here on the right, here's kind of what the MyData world's beginning to say to them. You need to take control, right? Because we're at the centre of this world, and you're at the centre of this world, and you need to be taking control of this world. So, I don't want to take control of my world, right? Push your suppliers to give you control. That isn't going to happen. They're not going to do it, right? Because they don't care enough. Take time to manage your consents. It's important. I don't understand what you're talking about. I don't understand the system. I don't understand how it works. These in the apps, for example, there's a ridiculous situation where individuals are asked to understand the technical underpinnings of a phone to know that if you grant access to a particular feature, that somehow transitions to an understanding of what data that might facilitate access to and what purpose it might be used for. I don't think so. It doesn't. So we've got even the consent mechanisms and basic things like phones are completely mismatched to the market requirements. And at the centre of it all, they just want to trust the internet. Right? What started me off on this path of trying to build something fundamentally different was very, very simple. My daughter said to me, "Dad, can I have a Facebook account?" Now, knowing what we all pretty much know, my God, no. Right? Not a chance in hell. To which my wife said, "All right, what's the alternative?" Damn, you got me there. So that's kind of what I was starting to think about. But what it basically boils down to, I want to be able to say to my daughter, or I want my daughter to be able to say to her children, "Of course you can, darling. Of course you can use that service. Of course you can use that social platform." Because there's an inherent value proposition in the way in which we built the services that are out there. And that's what we're all trying to get to. So do these guys too. And they don't want to deal with consent and all this other stuff. They just want it to happen. They want it like magic. They're very uncompromising. one more again. Oh, that's going the wrong way. Sorry, this mouse thing is not working as a clicker. Let's just do it over here. Come on. I'll mess something up. Right. I'm going to do that from now on. It's a lot easier. So, and at the centre of all of this is identity. Right? Identity is the, if all of this down here is all the bits of information around us, all these bitcoins or whatever you want to call it, at the top of it, locked up in this nice little chest, is me and my identity. And these pins and needles are all about trying to get that control back to me and locked up in my world and safe for me. But perversely, businesses want that too. And so we have to find a balance in this identity framework between businesses' requirements and your requirements. And consent isn't going to be the way to achieve that. So, how do we move this on? How do we get this ecosystem to go forward? So, and just to validate this, so from the identity fight point of view, what I see happening, and I've spoken to pretty much all of these market sectors at one point in time, from a government point of view, it's actually not too difficult and objective, because you have to comply to what your government tells you to do. So interestingly, the governments are a very useful start point for getting people to understand what a MyData world looks like, because they can be mandated to do whatever it is the government decides they make them want to do. So that's okay. But these other sectors are also looking at this and going, well, actually, the mobile telco sector is saying, well, the phone's part of your identity, we can leverage that value proposition, so we want to be an identity provider to certain types of application service provision. And of course, we've got the default underpinnings of that, the infrastructural people like Google and Apple, who are also saying the same thing. There's a fight going on between these guys about where the identity really sits and who has a degree of control over that. And the banks, as we've seen in some of the other presentations, have our trust in a way most other platforms don't. So they're going, well, we should be the centre of your digital world, because your digital world is financial more than anything else. Well, some of it is, some of it isn't. And then social media networks, of course, Facebook, they want that to be your world. That's another part of our identity. So yeah, this is it as well. And then the web advertisers, they're just sitting in the background trying to suck up as much as they can so they can target you. Right? So they want your identity without your, they don't want your name necessarily, but they certainly want to know virtually everything they can about you. So for example, Facebook as a platform now profiles you in 52,000 different ways for advertising purposes, which is pretty scary, actually. So this is the way the world's got to. This is what the fight that's going on out there that won't change. So are these pins and PDSs just adding to the problem? Are they going to add more silos if they deliver this capacity into the marketplace, the way that they're currently developed? So nation states are getting their head around this in a way that most of the rest of the market hasn't got it to. So GovGov Verified is quite an interesting one. I quite like the way they've done that. They basically said there are a certain set of principles for identity that I want you to follow. And if you follow those principles, you can be a service provider for identity to the government. And there are 12 different companies delivering services into, which allow me as an individual to choose which one I trust the most, based upon the types of data that they ask for me, which are in aggregate sufficient from a government point of view to define my identity for government purposes. So I think, oh, that's quite nice, that's all right. I can see how that works. But then the banks are sitting there, and interesting, they're moving into this world with PSD2, and underpinning that is something called ISO 20022. And interesting, it's focused around transactional support. So at the top level, they're meant to be facilitating interoperability with our personal data so that the market is opened up. And what they've cleverly done is made sure that actually that only works at the transactional level through the standards. Okay, so you haven't quite got my identity, but you can transact with my identity. I'll allow that, but as the bank, I'm going to keep control of that bloody identity. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And even at the standards level, that's the way it's aimed at. Of course, Google and Facebook, as I say, have already got your identities in many ways, and the only thing really limiting their exploitation is legislative constraints and frameworks. And then the mobile telcos, they're really chafing at the bit at the moment because they have legislation sitting on top of them that doesn't allow them to use data, our data, in the same way that the over-the-top providers can. And they're pretty unhappy about this. And they want that freedom to operate in the same way as the over top. So they actually want to use all of our communication data in the same way to create identities in the same way that Facebook uses our data. But there's a fight going on around the next version. So everyone's talking about GDPR at the moment. They're kind of not watching what's probably more important, which is the regulation for the privacy of electronic communication, which is the e-privacy, as most people would understand it. And there's a lot of very interesting stuff in the current draft on that, and it's really the companion legislation for the GDPR can have a massive impact on the way in which our privacy is dealt with, particularly in an identity service and communication services. And then we get these PDS-PIMs coming in, adding another level of sort of user-centric services, not necessarily solving all problems. Brilliant. That one works. So, okay, excellent. So what does this mean from the individual point of view? What we end up with is me in the center, which is great, and then all of these different identities that I now have to engage with. So my world doesn't really change, frankly. There's no real efficiency from my point of view. I'm already doing all of these things, and I'm going to continue doing all of these things, even in a MyData adjusted world, because they're all separated for different purposes. So have things really got better, or will things really get better, or is this a transition point in the marketplace? Kind of interesting question. So I want to take a step back for a second, and so let's kind of talk about the market. Let's talk about the internet as a whole. Because I really think it has fundamentally changed. And some of us are as old as I am, will remember that before the internet, when the internet came along, what happened, how that moved from mainframe-based communication systems to distributed computers to PCs to laptop computers to mobile phones. But all of that time, something has fundamentally been changing. And the internet itself has fundamentally been changing. Not from a technical point of view, but from an implementation point of view. Because it's become truly pervasive and ubiquitous in a way that it really wasn't before. So this cloud, so I started the presentation by talking about, are we in a clouded thinking world? So I think we probably are, because we're still, most of the supply chain out there is still thinking cloud client, cloud client. And this cloud client thought process is missing the point about the nature of the way in which the internet has evolved, because it's everywhere now. It's at the edge, it's pervasive. It doesn't, we can engage with it everywhere, but interestingly, why do we have to keep going up to this central point and going back down? So for PIMs and PDSs, am I saying that I'm looking at the distributed models as a preference? Well, yeah, sort of, but not absolute. Because to me the cloud is just another computer of part of this ubiquitous framework that's out there. So back in, some people may remember Sun when they launched, and they were moving from the mainframe world to the platform where we each have a computer. And they said, in this distributed computing world, the network is the computer. In this world, I think the internet is the computer. That's where we are now. And I think we don't spend enough time thinking about that. So, what does it do? Well, it opens doors for real-time data processing. And what I mean by that is, most of the real personal data we need is available in real time. Why do we have to centralize it? Why do we have to store it? Why can't we just use what's around us on a real-time basis? Because that's far more secure from the point of view of the individual. How much of these identities do we actually need to put up into a cloud or some store point when it's flowing around us pretty much all of the time? So, and you can manage data on the move in the same way as you can manage data in a database. I've worked for companies that have been doing that for 10, 15 years, so it's not new capacity. But when we're thinking about implementations, I'd really like us to think a little bit more about the ubiquitous nature of the internet and our opportunities to work with the real-time flow of data rather than a temporally displaced copy of something somewhere that allows us to transact at some later point. Why don't we transact in real time on real-time information? So, what we can do, and what this allows us to do through this kind of thinking, is start bringing the cloud down to the crowd, which is what we actually want to do. We want to bring digital into the society. But to do that, we have to make it more trustworthy, because the more real it becomes, the more contextual to my actual real life, as opposed to some virtual digital life, the more I have to trust. And that's actually a good thing, because then that drives the need for a MyData ecosystem. So the more we try and bring remove this clouded thinking and bring the cloud down to the edge, and bring that societal value into the context of where we are and what we're doing, the more the MyData ecosystem will have to flourish to service that need. So, I started off saying I was an application developer and I'm looking at the world. So what's happening now is that we've got this MyData definition, but from my point of view, what I've got is lots and lots of platforms that I need to transact with or engage with, which means more APIs, more integration, more functionality to deal with. So my ability to engage with the MyData ecosystem is limited because nothing's really changed. I have to keep talking to everybody in the same way. So every identity or profile is defined differently with different access methods, depending upon the nature of the service or provision that I'm trying to engage with. And we haven't fundamentally addressed that by putting all the data into the individual's control. So how do we solve that one? Interoperability. It's in the spec for MyData. I really would like to say, this is my conclusion point. Until we address this point, fundamentally, as part of the MyData ecosystem development, the ecosystem development itself will not evolve and develop. Because until we do that, I won't be able to be one guy talking to one guy. Because that's what I want to be able to do, is just to integrate with any identity or any profile, defined anywhere, irrespective of who did it and what purpose it was built for. Because that's the way the market is. It's distributed, it's broken up, it's siloed. But I want to integrate with it in one way and one way only. So that's my requirement, and I would say interoperability is top of my list for what we as an organisation or the movement focus in on if we're going to foster and facilitate the development of the ecosystem. So, summary, the ecosystem itself will not be successful until it develops and to serve businesses. It needs an interoperability framework capable of supporting a pervasive internet at the edge, which probably means distributed models, which is mostly what's being built anyway. And we will have to agree, whether we like it or not, on a single MyData identity method. And there are lots of competing implementers and standards out there, none of which have quite made it yet. But when we get that one, and we get this one, we have all the tools we need for an ecosystem to properly develop. And what I think will happen with the PIMs and PDAs is they're going to become as a service. They're going to be, research as a service. They're going to be finance as a service. That kind of stuff. So we'll move away from. I don't think PIMs and PDAs will actually be a central thing. I think they're a transitional point for our understanding of the way in which the market needs to evolve as we move towards this point. Thank you.